In the 1980s, the Kentish countryside of England was a patchwork of rolling fields, winding lanes, and ancient oak trees, casting long shadows over sleepy villages. James grew up in this idyllic setting, a 10-year-old boy with tousled brown hair and muddy sneakers. My days were filled with cycling down dirt paths, exploring the woods near our home, and spending lazy weekend afternoons at the home of Grandpa Derek, the grandfather of my best friend, Gordon. Gordon was unlike any kid I knew, tall, wiry, with eyes that burned with an almost feverish intensity. He was obsessed with the military. From the earliest days, I could remember, his room was a shrine to war, plastic toy soldiers lined up in precise formations, airfix model tanks and planes meticulously assembled, and stacks of books about World War II. His walls were adorned with replica helmets, and his shelves gleamed with polished brass badges. Once I tried building an airfix tank, but ended up with glue on my fingers and a lopsided mess. "You've got no talent for this?" James Gordon laughed, his tone half teasing, half superior. Our families were close-knit. My parents were friends with Gordon's, and my Nan was inseparable from Grandpa Derek. Derek, a World War II veteran, lived alone in a modest ground-floor flat in town. He was the epitome of a kind grandfather, warm smile, gentle voice, and eyes clouded with memories he rarely shared. On our visits, he'd offer us biscuits and tell stories of his youth, but he always steered clear of the war. Gordon, however, was relentless, bombarding him with questions about battles, enemies, and how many people did you shoot. Grandpa Derek would force a smile, give vague answers, and change the subject. As a naive kid, I didn't realize Gordon's questions were probing wounds Derek had buried deep. Every weekend, Gordon and I would cycle to Derek's flat. His home smelled of old wood and pipe tobacco, with black and white photos of a younger Derek in uniform hanging on the walls. Gordon often wandered off to poke around the flat while I sat with Derek, listening to his tales. I loved those moments, not just for the biscuits, but because Derek listened to my childish stories about school or the fish I caught in the lake. But I couldn't ignore how Gordon changed around Derek. He grew tense, like a predator, sizing up its prey, his eyes darting to corners of the room, as if searching for something. That summer, when we were 10, Gordon and I began building a tree fort in the woods near our village. It was an ambitious project, for 2 kids scavenged wooden planks from Gordon's shed, ropes tied to sturdy branches, and a tattered tarpaulin for a roof. The fort became our battlefield for Gordon's favorite game soldiers. He'd play the commander, wielding a stick, as a rifle, barking orders like a real officer. I wasn't as keen on war games, but I went along to keep him happy. Little did I know that Fort would soon become the stage for an event that would haunt me forever. On a particular Saturday, we prepared for our usual visit to Derek's. Gordon was unusually quiet, his eyes glinting with a strange excitement. As we pedaled through the fields, he turned to me and said, "Today's gonna be special, James. You'll see." I grinned and pedaled faster, brushing off the uneasy feeling creeping into my chest. Gordon was planning something, and I, a trusting kid, was utterly unprepared for what lay ahead. That day, a third friend joined us, Eugene. He wasn't Gordon's favorite. Short, chubby, with round glasses perpetually sliding down his nose, Eugene was a chronic complainer, grumbling about everything from the heat to the thorns snagging his legs. Gordon called him the whiner, but I didn't mind. Eugene's constant griping was offset by his funny stories about his chaotic family, and he never hesitated to share his candy. I'd invited him along, thinking it'd make the day more fun. Gordon, however, was visibly annoyed, shooting me a glare when Eugene showed up. He didn't say anything, but the tension in his eyes was unmistakable. I ignored it, hoping he'd get over it. Our visit to Grandpa Derek followed the usual routine. He greeted us with his familiar smile, ushered us to the kitchen table, and set out a tin of chocolate biscuits. Eugene, visiting for the first time, was enthralled, peppering Derek with questions about the photos on the walls. Gordon, however, was subdued. He nibbled his biscuit, his eyes scanning the room. Restlessly, I noticed him glancing at the door to the storage room, where Derek kept old wooden crates and wartime relics. I didn't think much of it at the time, but I wish I had. When Derek stepped into the kitchen to make tea, Gordon slipped away to the storage room. Eugene and I stayed at the table, chatting with Derek when he returned. 10 minutes later, Gordon reappeared, hands in his pockets, his face calm, but his eyes blazing with that same strange excitement. "Let's go," he said curtly. I assumed he was eager to get to the fort, so I didn't question it. We said goodbye to Derek and left, unaware that Gordon had just stolen something from the storage room, something that would change everything. On the way to the woods, Eugene's complaints started. "Why do we have to walk so far? These brambles are scratching my legs." Gordon ignored him, striding ahead with purpose. I tried to lighten the mood with a joke, but Gordon didn't laugh. When we reached the fort, Eugene's eyes lit up. "This is awesome," he exclaimed, forgetting his grumbling. We dove into a game of soldiers, charging through the trees with stick guns, shouting, and pretending to die in dramatic fashion. Gordon, as always, was the commander, directing us with fierce intensity. Eugene, unfamiliar with the game, stumbled along, tripping and whining, but trying to keep up. After a while, Gordon stopped abruptly. He stood in the center of the fort, looking at us with an eerie smile. "Want to see something cool?" he asked. My curiosity piqued. I nodded. Eugene, hesitant but curious, agreed. Gordon slowly opened his backpack, and time seemed to freeze. He pulled out 2 objects, a sleek black pistol, later identified as a Luger P08, and a grenade. The sunlight, filtering through the trees, glinted off the metal, giving them a menacing sheen. My heart pounded. Eugene's jaw dropped, speechless. I wasn't a weapons expert, but Gordon's obsession had taught me enough to recognize that the grenade was missing its pin. My mind flashed to school assemblies, warning about live grenades found in fields. "Gordon," I said, my voice trembling. "That's dangerous." Eugene, now in full panic, shrieked, "It's gonna explode. You'll kill us all." Gordon's smile widened, cold and unsettling. "I know," he said calmly. "And if I let go of this lever, we'll all go up in smoke." The air in the forest grew heavy. I locked eyes with Eugene, and we silently agreed. No sudden moves. Gordon, still clutching the grenade, began rambling about dying as heroes in battle like Grandpa Derek. I tried to stay calm, telling him this wasn't a war, that there were no enemies. But the look in his eyes, wild, unhinged, told me he was far from rational. The woods, once our playground, now felt like a trap, and Gordon held the key to our survival. The forest was silent, save for the rustle of leaves and Eugene's shallow, panicked breaths. Gordon stood before us, the grenade in one hand, the Luger tucked into his jacket pocket. His face was a mask of eerie calm, but his eyes burned with a manic intensity I'd never seen before. I felt like I was staring at a stranger, not the friend I'd known since we were toddlers. My mind raced, trying to find a way to diffuse the situation without setting him off. "Gordon," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Put that down. You don't want to hurt anyone." Eugene, trembling beside me, whimpered, "Please, Gordon, don't do this." But Gordon's smile only grew wider, his grip on the grenade tightening. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, his voice low and deliberate. "This is what heroes do. They die for something bigger. Like Grandpa Derek." He gestured with the grenade, and my stomach lurched. I remembered the stories from school about kids finding unexploded ordnance, grenades, shells, relics of a war long past. The missing pin made it clear this wasn't a toy. Eugene's panic boiled over. "You're crazy," he shouted, pointing at the grenade. "That thing's live. You're gonna blow us all up." Gordon tilted his head, studying Eugene like a scientist, observing a specimen. Maybe, he said, his tone chillingly casual. But wouldn't that be epic? Going out in a blaze of glory? I could see Eugene's eyes darting toward the trees, his body tensing as if preparing to run. I grabbed his arm, whispering, "Don't. He'll throw it." Eugene froze, his face pale. I tried reasoning with Gordon, my voice shaking, but firm. "There's no battle here, Gordon. No enemies. If that thing goes off, it's just us dead for nothing." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it came. He stepped closer, the grenade still clutched tightly. "You're wrong," he said. "This is our war. Right here, right now." He raised the grenade slightly, and I braced myself, expecting the worst. Eugene's nerve broke. With a cry, he lunged backward, stumbling over a root. Instinct took over. I didn't think I acted. I grabbed the grenade from Gordon's hand, my fingers brushing against the cold metal, and hurled it as far as I could into the underbrush. The three of us stood frozen, waiting for the explosion that would end us all. But nothing happened. Silence enveloped the forest, broken only by the distant chirp of a bird. Then Gordon laughed, a wild, unhinged cackle that sent chills down my spine. "It's fake, you idiots," he said, doubling over with laughter. "A model. You should have seen your faces." I stared at him, my heart still racing, my mind struggling to process the revelation. The grenade, the thing that had terrified us, was just a prop, a cruel joke. Eugene, still on the ground, looked like he might cry, his glasses fogged with sweat. I wanted to be angry, to scream at Gordon for scaring us, but relief flooded through me. "You're a jerk," I muttered, shoving him playfully in the shoulder. He stumbled back, still laughing. And that's when it happened. Something fell from his jacket pocket, hitting the ground with a metallic clunk. Before I could register what it was, a deafening bang echoed through the forest, and my ears rang as if someone had struck a gong inside my skull. Eugene crumpled to the ground. Slow-motion horror unfolding before my eyes. A red gash bloomed on his forehead, blood trickling down his face. I turned to Gordon, whose face had gone deathly white, his laughter replaced by a look of pure shock. The Luger, the real pistol he'd stolen from Grandpa Derek, lay on the ground, smoke curling from its barrel. It had hit a rock when it fell, discharging a bullet that struck Eugene square in the forehead. Time slowed to a crawl. The forest, once alive with our laughter, now felt like a graveyard. Eugene lay motionless, his glasses askew, blood pooling beneath his head. I dropped to my knees beside him, my hands shaking as I reached out, afraid to touch him. "Eugene," I shouted, my voice hoarse. "Eugene, wake up!" Gordon stood frozen. The color drained from his face, the grenade model forgotten in the grass. I didn't know what to do. My mind was a whirlwind of panic and disbelief. Was Eugene dead? Had Gordon just killed him? I looked at the Luger, its sleek, deadly form glinting in the sunlight. Grandpa Derek had kept it from the war, a relic he thought was unloaded, a memento of a time he wanted to forget. But it wasn't unloaded. It had been jammed or neglected, and the impact with the rock had set it off. Gordon finally moved, stumbling forward. He's fine, right? He stammered, his voice barely a whisper. It was an accident. I ignored him, focusing on Eugene. To my relief, his chest rose and fell. He was breathing. The wound looked gruesome, but the bullet had grazed his forehead, ricocheting off the hard bone. He was alive, but he needed help, and fast. "We have to get help," I said, my voice trembling. "Now." Gordon nodded, but his eyes were distant, as if he couldn't process what had happened. I grabbed his arm, shaking him. "Gordon, run to the village. Get someone." He hesitated, then took off, disappearing through the trees. I stayed with Eugene, tearing a strip from my shirt to press against the wound, my hands slick with blood. "Hang on, Eugene," I whispered. "You're gonna be okay." Minutes felt like hours. I sat there, cradling Eugene's head, praying he'd hold on. My mind replayed the moment the gun went off, the look on Gordon's face, the weight of the grenade in my hand. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd played a part in this by shoving Gordon, by not stopping him sooner. Guilt and fear churned in my gut, but I pushed them down. Eugene needed me to stay strong. Finally, I heard voices. Adults from the village, led by Gordon. A paramedic knelt beside Eugene, taking over with calm efficiency. "He's lucky," the paramedic said, examining the wound. The bullet didn't penetrate the skull. They loaded Eugene onto a stretcher, and I followed numb as they carried him to an ambulance. Gordon trailed behind, silent, his earlier bravado gone. At the hospital, Eugene's parents arrived, their faces a mix of relief and anger when they learned he'd survive. The bullet had grazed his forehead, leaving a nasty wound, but no lasting damage. The doctors called it a miracle. I sat in the waiting room, my clothes stained with blood, replaying the day's events. Gordon sat across from me, staring at the floor. "I didn't mean it," he mumbled. "It was supposed to be a joke." I didn't respond. I couldn't find the words. The days that followed were a blur. Eugene recovered quickly, the graze on his forehead, earning him a scar and a reputation as the coolest kid in school. He wore the injury like a badge of honor, joking that getting shot was the best thing that ever happened to him. But for Gordon and me, the incident left deeper scars. Grandpa Derek was devastated when he learned what had happened. The Luger, a war trophy he'd kept hidden, was confiscated by the police. He swore it was unloaded, a relic he hadn't touched in decades. The authorities, lenient due to looser gun laws at the time, gave him a warning, but no charges. Still, Derek blamed himself, his kind eyes filled with guilt whenever he saw me. Gordon faced harsher consequences. His parents, furious and ashamed, grounded him indefinitely. They forced him to dismantle his military collection. Every model tank, every toy soldier, every book donated or destroyed. He was banned from visiting Derek without adult supervision, a rule meant to protect Derek as much as Gordon. The boy who dreamed of being a soldier was stripped of his obsession, his room left bare, a shadow of its former glory. I struggled to make sense of it all. Gordon had been my best friend, the kid I'd spent countless summers with. But the incident in the woods had revealed a side of him I didn't understand. Was he cruel or just reckless? Had he meant to scare us? Or had he truly believed the grenade was real? I replayed his words, his manic laughter, the way he'd spoken of dying as heroes. It chilled me to think how close we'd come to tragedy. When I finally saw Gordon again, he was different. The fire in his eyes was gone, replaced by a hollow resignation. "I'm sorry, James," he said, his voice flat. I didn't know the jump gun was loaded. I wanted to forgive him, to go back to the way things were, but something had broken between us. The trust we'd built over years of friendship was gone, replaced by a lingering unease. Eugene, surprisingly, took it in stride. He visited me after leaving the hospital, his forehead bandaged, but his grin intact. "You saved me. You know," he said, grabbing that grenade. That was brave. I didn't feel brave. I felt like a kid who'd stumbled into a nightmare and barely made it out. But Eugene's words stayed with me, a small light in the darkness. Years passed, and life moved on. Eugene and I stayed friends, growing into old geezers who still laugh about our childhood adventures. He never let Gordon live down to the day he shot him in the head, turning the trauma into a running joke. Gordon, to his credit, grew up. The incident in the woods seemed to extinguish his military obsession. He went to university, got a job managing a Sainsbury's, and became a normal, well-adjusted adult. We kept in touch, though our friendship never regained its former closeness. Grandpa Derek lived into the 1990s. His mind slowly claimed by Alzheimer's. I visited him in the nursing home, holding his hand as he smiled, unaware of who I was. His death hit me hard, a reminder of the man who'd shown me kindness when I needed it most. I never blamed him for the Luger. He'd carried enough guilt in his life. The woods where it all happened are still there, though the fort is long gone, reclaimed by nature. Sometimes I walk those paths, remembering the kids. We were 3 boys, caught in a moment that could have ended so much worse. The memory of that day lingers a scar on my mind. I can still hear Gordon's laughter, see the glint of the Luger, feel the weight of the grenade in my hand. It's a reminder of how quickly innocence can turn to terror. How even the best of friends can harbor secrets that change everything. Gordon's prank, his moment of reckless bravado, could have cost us our lives. But it also taught me something. Courage isn't just facing danger. It's standing up to those you trust when they cross a line. I like to think I found that courage when I grabbed the grenade, when I stayed with Eugene, when I faced the aftermath. And though the woods are quiet now, their shadows still whisper of the day we learned how fragile friendship can be. In the early 2010s, the suburban sprawl of a small American town was my world. I, Ethan, was a 16-year-old junior in high school, an average kid with a knack for football and baseball, a decent GPA, and a group of jock friends who filled my days with pickup games and trips to the local diner. Life was simple school sports, video games, and the occasional fishing trip by the lake. My family lived in a modest house with a creaky porch where my grandma, who moved in after Grandpa passed, kept the kitchen stocked with her famous oatmeal cookies. It was a predictable, comfortable existence until Leo walked into my life and turned it upside down. Leo was an enigma. A senior at my school, he was tall, lanky, with sharp cheekbones and piercing green eyes that seemed to see through you. He wasn't part of any clique, not a jock, not a band geek, not a theater kid, though his flair for the dramatic suggested he could have been. He was a loner, always on the fringes, scribbling in a notebook, or reading thick books no one else touched. I'd seen him around, but never spoken to him until one crisp autumn day in the school courtyard. He approached me, his walk confident, but oddly deliberate, like a chess player, moving a piece. "Hey, Ethan," he said, his voice smooth and disarming. "I'm Leo. I've decided we're gonna be best pals." I laughed, taken aback by his boldness, but I was easygoing, so I shrugged and said, "Sure, why not?" That moment marked the beginning of a friendship that would unravel my sense of reality. Leo integrated himself into my life with alarming ease. We started hanging out after school, playing video games at my place, grabbing burgers at the mall, or casting lines at the lake. He was charming, witty, and endlessly curious, asking about my life with an intensity that felt flattering at first. But there were oddities I couldn't ignore. He never invited me to his house, claiming it was under renovation or too messy. He spoke vaguely about his family, mentioning a younger brother who'd died, a story that tugged at my heart until I later learned it was a lie. His life seemed like a puzzle with missing pieces, but I brushed it off. Leo was fun, and in my uncomplicated world, that was enough. Our friendship grew over months, but cracks began to show. Leo's stories didn't add up. He'd say he lived on Oak Street, then mention a house by the river. He'd talk about a cousin who was a pilot, then claim he had no extended family. The lies were small, meaningless, but they piled up, creating a nagging unease. I'd catch him watching me, sometimes his smile sharp and calculating, like he was testing me. Yet I never confronted him. I was too trusting, too eager to keep the peace. My grandma, sharp as ever, noticed something off. "That boy's got secrets." "Ethan," she said one evening, her eyes narrowing over her knitting. I laughed it off, but her words stuck with me. Leo's brilliance was undeniable. He aced every class, without effort, solved math problems in his head, and could recite poetry with a passion that silenced rooms. But his intelligence had a dark edge. He'd get bored, and when he did, he'd amuse himself in ways that set my nerves on edge. Once at the mall, he convinced a stranger to buy us ice cream by spinning a wild tale about being orphans. Another time, he slipped a fake spider into my backpack, laughing hysterically when I screamed in class. Just keeping things interesting, he'd say his grin both charming and unsettling. I didn't know it then, but Leo was playing a game, and I was his unwitting pawn. By winter, our friendship was a fixture in my life, but the unease grew. Leo's games were escalating, and I was starting to feel like a character in a story he was writing, one where he controlled every twist. I had no idea how far he'd go, how his boredom would push him to orchestrate a scheme that nearly destroyed me. But that autumn day, when he declared us friends, was the first move in a game I didn't know I was playing. Our town was small, the kind where everyone knew everyone's business, and high school was its own microcosm. My friends' guys, like Jake and Mike, who I'd known since middle school, were loud, loyal, and uncomplicated. We'd spend Fridays at the arcade or cheering at football games, our lives revolving around the next practice or prank. Leo's arrival disrupted that rhythm. He didn't fit with my crew, and they didn't hide their skepticism. "What's with that guy?" Jake asked once, tossing a football in my yard. "He's always watching you like a hawk." I defended Leo, saying he was just quirky. But Jake's words echoed Grandma's warning. Leo's integration into my life was seamless, yet strange. He'd show up at my locker unannounced, join me on walks home, or text me late at night with random trivia. His energy was magnetic, but it came with a shadow. He'd dodge questions about his past, redirecting with a joke or a story so engaging I'd forget my curiosity. His lies, though small, began to grate. He'd claim he'd been to Paris, then admit he'd only seen it in movies. He'd say his dad was a lawyer, then a mechanic. The inconsistencies were maddening, but I let them slide, chalking it up to his eccentric charm. At home, Leo was a frequent guest. My parents liked him. He was polite, articulate, and always brought a gift, like a cheap keychain or a candy bar. Grandma, however, remained wary. "He's too smooth," she'd mutter, watching him from her armchair. Leo seemed to sense her suspicion and dialed up the charm, complimenting her cookies or asking about her youth. She'd smile politely, but never warmed to him. I wish I'd listened to her instincts, but I was a kid, dazzled by Leo's charisma and blind to the storm brewing. One evening, as we played video games in my room, Leo's mask slipped. I asked about his family, hoping to bridge the gap of his secrecy. His smile faltered, and for a moment, his eyes were cold, almost predatory. "Why do you care?" he snapped, then laughed it off, claiming he was joking. The moment passed, but it left a chill. I started noticing other things, the way he'd linger near my desk, eyeing my belongings, the way he'd ask about my routines with a precision that felt invasive. I told myself I was paranoid, but the seed of doubt was planted. Leo's games began to take a darker turn. He'd borrow small items from my house, a pen, a coaster, a fridge magnet, things so trivial I barely noticed. I'd find them missing days later, assuming I'd misplaced them. He'd drop cryptic comments like, "You'd be surprised what people don't see," with a smirk that made my skin crawl. At school, he'd orchestrate pranks, like slipping a note into my locker that read, "I'm watching you. only to laugh when I confronted him. "Relax, Ethan," he'd say. "It's just a game." But his games were starting to feel like traps, and I was caught in the middle. By spring, I was uneased but still tethered to Leo's orbit. He was my friend, or so I thought, and I couldn't imagine cutting him off. My life, once predictable, was now laced with a subtle dread. Leo's presence was a constant hum, like static on a radio, growing louder with each passing day. I didn't know it yet, but he was weaving a web, and I was about to be ensnared in his most sinister game. A scheme that would test my trust, my sanity, and my ability to survive the mind of a genius bored enough to destroy me. The shift in Leo's behavior was gradual, but unmistakable. By senior year, his games grew bolder, more calculated. He started dropping hints that chilled me to the core. During a fishing trip, he casually mentioned hurting a neighbor's cat to see what it felt like, his tone so nonchalant, I thought he was joking. But his eyes, sharp and unblinking, told a different story. Another time, walking home at dusk, he said he'd followed a woman in the park just to see where she went. I laughed nervously, hoping it was another prank, but the pit in my stomach grew. Leo's stories took on a darker edge. He'd talk about trophies, refusing to elaborate when I pressed him. "You wouldn't understand," he'd say, his voice low, his smile coy. I started avoiding him, making excuses to skip our hangouts. My friends noticed the change. "You okay, man?" Mike asked during practice. "You've been weird since that Leo guy showed up." I brushed it off, but inside, I was unraveling. Leo's presence was suffocating his games, no longer harmless. The turning point came on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday. I was in math class scribbling notes when the intercom crackled. "Ethan Carter, please report to the principal's office." My stomach dropped. I had no idea why I was being summoned, but a sense of dread washed over me. As I walked down the hall, my mind raced. Had something happened at home? Was Grandma okay? The principal's office was a sterile room with fluorescent lights and a heavy oak desk. Principal Harris, a stern woman with graying hair, sat across from me, flanked by her secretary and a security guard. "We need to search your bag and locker," Harris said. Her tone clipped. I blinked, confused. Why, I asked, my voice small. She didn't answer, just gestured for me to empty my backpack. I complied, spilling out textbooks, a water bottle, and a pair of gym socks. The guard rifled through them, finding nothing. Harris and the guard exchanged a glance I couldn't read. They escorted me to my locker, where they searched again, pulling out binders and a forgotten sandwich. Still nothing. Finally, I demanded answers. "What's going on?" Harris's expression was grim. "We've received reports from multiple students that you've been talking about a hit list and keeping firearms in your locker." The words hit me like a punch. I felt the room spin, my knees weak. "That's not true," I cried, tears welling up. "I'd never do that." The accusations were absurd, but the weight of them crushed me. I broke down sobbing in the hallway, my world collapsing. Harris's face softened slightly, and the secretary, Ms. Lane, led me back to the office, making me tea as I trembled. I begged to know who'd accused me, but Harris refused to say, only mentioning multiple students. The search had found nothing, and my raw emotion seemed to convince them of my innocence. They sent me home, promising to investigate. That night, I lay awake replaying the day. Leo's face kept surfacing, his smirk, his cryptic comments, his games. I couldn't prove it, but I felt his hand in this. The thought made me sick, but I had no evidence, only a gnawing suspicion. A week later, the school called. Harris apologized, her tone curt but sincere. After further investigation, the accusations were deemed not credible, she said. The students were misled, thinking they were helping. The phrase stuck with me, misled. It reeked of manipulation, and I knew Leo was behind it. Relief washed over me, but it was tainted by anger and fear. I'd been cleared, but the experience left a scar, a violation of my trust in the world. I graduated that spring, eager to leave high school behind. I enrolled in college out of state, hoping distance would erase Leo's shadow. He'd vanished after graduation, and I didn't care to know where he'd gone. I tried to move on, focusing on my studies and new friends, but the memory of that day in the principal's office haunted me. I felt exposed, as if Leo had peeled back my life and toyed with its pieces. Then, months into my freshman year, an email arrived. It was from Leo, sent to my private college address, a flex to show he could still find me. My hands shook as I opened it. The message was long, a confession that confirmed my worst fears. Leo admitted everything, the lies about his life, the stolen items from my house, the psychological games. He'd taken meaningless things, a bottle of bleach, a ceramic banana, a pill from grandma's prescription, because he wanted to see if I'd notice. He'd planted the serial killer hints to scare me, reveling in my fear. And the accusations, he'd orchestrated them, convincing classmates to report me by spreading rumors so cleverly no one traced them back to him. He claimed he'd ensured my exoneration, as if that absolved him. "I didn't want you to suffer," he wrote. "I just wanted you to know I could." The words chilled me. Leo's game wasn't about hate or revenge. It was about power, about proving he could bend my life to his will. He'd done it all because he was bored, a genius with no outlet for his restless mind. The email included a photo, a pile of my stolen items, with that day's newspaper for proof. It was pathetic, a sad display of his obsession, but it terrified me. He'd kept those things, carried them into his new life, a reminder of his control. I didn't reply. Responding would have given him what he wanted, a reaction, a continuation of his game. I deleted the email, blocked his address, and tried to forget. But Leo's shadow lingered. Every missed call, every misplaced item, every unexplained setback made me wonder, is he back? Is he watching? I'd look over my shoulder in crowded places, half expecting to see his green eyes in the crowd. The fear wasn't rational, but it was real. A residue of his manipulation. College was a fresh start, but I carried the weight of Leo's betrayal. I confided in a counselor who helped me process the trauma, but some wounds don't heal completely. I learned to trust again, to build new friendships, but I was cautious, always searching for hidden motives. My family supported me, Grandma especially, who'd seen through Leo from the start. Some people are storms, she said once. They tear through your life and leave you to pick up the pieces. She was right, and Leo was a hurricane. Years later, I'm older, wiser, but not untouched. I've built a life, friends, a career, a sense of peace. But Leo's game left a mark. I don't know where he is, and I don't want to. I hope he's found something to occupy his mind, because the alternative is too frightening to consider. If he ever gets bored again, if he remembers me, I don't know what he's capable of. The best revenge is living well, moving forward, letting him fade into insignificance. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, I hear the echo of his laughter, and I wonder if I'll ever truly escape the game he started. In the late 1980s, the small town of Millhaven, nestled in the rolling hills of upstate New York, was a postcard of Americana. Its tree-lined streets buzzed with kids on bikes, chasing the last light of summer evenings, while neighbors swapped stories over picket fences. Tommy Ellis, was a scrawny 5-year-old with a mop sandy hair, a shy smile, and a heart full of dreams. My world revolved around kindergarten at Millhaven Elementary, where the playground's swings and the promise of story time were my greatest joys. My family lived in a modest 2-story house with a sagging front porch where Mom's apple pies perfumed the air, and Dad spent weekends tinkering with his old Chevy in the garage. Life was a gentle rhythm of school play and love, until William Harper decided I was his to control. William was my classmate, a broad-shouldered boy with cold blue eyes and a smirk that hid a cruel streak. Our mothers, Ellen Ellis and Susan Harper, were best friends, bonded over church bake sales and PTA meetings. Their friendship, forged in the pews of St. Mary's, meant William and I were thrown together. From the start, our play dates as inevitable as Sunday sermons. But William didn't see me as a friend. To him, I was a possession, a living toy, to bend to his will. Even at 5, he was a master manipulator, his favorite game making me cry. He'd pinch the soft flesh of my arm under the lunch table, leaving bruises that faded before anyone noticed. During story time, he'd flick my ear with a rubber band, his face a mask of innocence as I flinched. His attacks were subtle, calculated, invisible to teachers who saw only a quiet boy and a sensitive kid prone to tears. Kindergarten was my battlefield, and William was the general. At recess, he'd corner me by the slide, demanding I hand over my fruit snacks or follow his orders, crawl through the dirt, sing a silly song, anything to humiliate me. If I hesitated, his punishments were swift. A sharp jab to my ribs, a tug on my hair, or a whispered threat that made my stomach churn. "You're mine, Tommy," he'd say, his voice low and menacing. "Don't forget it." I was too scared to tell anyone. My parents thought I was clumsy, always coming home with torn shirts or broken toys. Mrs. Thompson, our teacher, called me a crybaby, urging me to toughen up. I learned to hide my fear, to swallow my sobs. But William's control grew with every passing day, a noose tightening around my young heart. Our family's closeness only deepened my torment. Weekends were spent at each other's houses, our mothers chatting over coffee, while William dragged me to his room or our backyard. His house was a palace compared to ours, sprawling modern, with polished hardwood floors and a manicured lawn. They had a golden retriever named Max, a Nintendo in the living room, and a fridge stocked with soda. But to me, it was a prison. William never let me play the Nintendo, forcing me to watch as he racked up high scores, promising next turn, until our mothers called us for dinner. His older sister, Jenny, a sullen teenager with headphones glued to her ears, ignored us, lost in her own world. His parents, Richard and Susan, were wealthy and distracted, seeing William as their golden boy, incapable of wrong. No one noticed the terror he inflicted, the way his presence turned my laughter to silence. At my house, William was no less cruel. He'd break my toys, a plastic dinosaur snapped in half, a toy car's wheels torn off, claiming it was an accident. He'd push me, during tag, making me trip and skin my knees, then laugh as I fought back tears. My parents, kind but busy, didn't see the pattern. Boys will be boys, Dad would say, ruffling my hair. Mom, always quick with a hug, thought I was just going through a phase. I wanted to tell them, to scream that William was hurting me, but fear stopped me. What if he found out? What if he hurt me worse? So I stayed silent, my world shrinking to the space between William's whims and my survival. School was my only refuge, a place where I tried to make other friends. I'd sit with kids like Bobby or Sarah at lunch, sharing my cookies and hoping for a connection. But William was always watching. He'd spread rumors that I was a tattletale, scaring off potential friends with a glare or a whispered threat. By the end of kindergarten, I was isolated, my classmates avoiding me like I carried a plague. William had claimed me, and no one dared challenge his ownership. I started to believe this was normal, that his cruelty was just how boys played. I invited him over, hoping to please him, to earn a moment of kindness. But it always ended the same: a bruise, a broken toy, a quiet sob in my room after he left. Grandma Ellis, who visited every Sunday, was the first to notice something was wrong. A sharp woman with silver hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, she'd pull me onto her lap and ask, "What's troubling you, Tommy?" Her eyes, warm but piercing, seemed to see through my forced smiles. I'd shrug, too afraid to speak, but her questions lingered. "You're too quiet," she said, once her voice soft. "Is someone being mean to you?" I wanted to tell her, to pour out the fear and pain, but William's threats echoed in my mind. Snitches get worse than stitches. So I shook my head, burying my face in her sweater, and she let it go, though her frown told me she wasn't convinced. Millhaven's rhythm carried on summer fairs, winter sledding, spring picnics. But for me, it was a facade. My days were a tightrope walk, balancing William's demands with my dwindling sense of self. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on my ceiling, praying for a way out. I didn't know what bullying was, not in the way adults defined it, but I knew William's games were wrong. Yet I felt powerless, a puppet dancing to his tune. My parents' love, my teacher's kindness, my town's warmth. They were all distant lights, unreachable behind the wall William had built around me. As first grade loomed, I clung to a fragile hope that things might change. Maybe William would find a new target, or I'd find the courage to stand up to him. But deep down, I knew better. William's hold was ironclad, forged in fear, and reinforced by my silence. He wasn't just my friend. He was my tormentor, my owner, my shadow. And in the quiet moments when the world was still, I wondered if I'd ever escape him, or if I was destined to be his forever. That summer, as fireflies lit up our backyard, I made a silent vow one day I'd be free. But freedom, I'd learn, would come at a cost, and the path to it would be paved with pain. First grade at Millhaven Elementary was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance for 6-year-old Tommy Ellis to shed the shadows of kindergarten. But William Harper's grip tightened, his cruelty blossoming like a weed in the cracks of my young life. Millhaven remained a quaint town, its streets alive with the chatter of neighbors and the jingle of ice cream trucks. But for me, it was a stage where William directed a relentless drama. My home, with its creaky porch and Mom's warm hugs, felt like a fading sanctuary, unable to shield me from the boy who owned my days. William's bullying evolved, growing more sophisticated, more insidious. In class, he'd sit behind me, his presence a constant pressure at my back. He'd prod my spine with a pencil's sharp tip, the pain small but persistent, leaving red marks I hid under my shirt. During group projects, he'd sabotage my work, smudging my drawings, or accidentally spilling glue on my papers. Teachers busy with 30 kids saw only my frustration, not the cause. Focus, Tommy. Mrs. Larson would say, her tone kind but clueless. William's smirk flashed when no one looked, was a silent promise. I was his, and no one could save me. Recess was his kingdom. The playground, with its swings and slides, was a battlefield where William waged his war. He'd force me to play his games. Races, I couldn't win tag, where I was always it, or hide and seek, where he'd find me with a shove. Other kids, sensing his power, stayed clear, leaving me alone with my tormentor. Once I tried joining a group playing kickball, but William appeared, his shadow swallowing the sun. "Tommy's with me," he said, his voice flat but final. The others scattered, and I followed him, my heart sinking. He led me behind the school, where he twisted my arm until I gasped, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Don't try that again," he warned. And I didn't. Our family's bond fueled my captivity. Mom and Susan Harper spent hours planning church events, their laughter drifting from the kitchen as William and I played. At his house, he'd lock us in his room, a shrine to his dominance, with posters of superheroes and a gleaming Nintendo I was never allowed to touch. He'd play games, taunting me with the controller, while I sat on the floor, watching Max, the golden retriever, nap in the corner. His sister, Jenny, breezed past her Walkman, blaring oblivious to my silent pleas. His parents, Richard and Susan, praised William's grades, blind to my downcast eyes. My house offered no escape. William would raid my toy box, snapping my action figure's limbs or scattering my puzzles. "Oops," he'd say, his grin ablade. My parents, believing we were just roughhousing, never suspected the truth. Isolation became my reality. William ensured I had no friends, his presence a barrier no kid dared cross. I'd watch classmates laugh and play their joy a world I couldn't reach. Lunchtime was the worst. I'd sit alone, my sandwich untouched, while William loomed nearby, daring me to defy him. Once, a new kid. Charlie sat with me, his smile kind. For a moment, I felt hope. But William noticed, and by the next day, Charlie avoided me, his eyes averted. "Told him you're a loser," William said later, chuckling as he flicked my ear. I stopped trying, my spirit eroding under his relentless campaign. I convinced myself this was friendship, that William's cruelty was normal. I'd invite him over, hoping to earn his approval, but it always ended in pain. A bruise, a broken toy, a quiet sob in my pillow. My grades slipped, my once bright curiosity dimming. Teachers noticed, but their concern was vague. Their solutions, extra worksheets, pep talks, useless against William's reign. At home, I grew quiet, my laughter rare. Mom worried, brushing my hair from my eyes and asking, "What's wrong, sweetie?" I'd mumble, nothing too afraid to speak. Dad, a gentle giant, tried cheering me up with fishing trips, but even those felt hollow. William's shadow lurking in my mind. Grandma Ellis was my only ally, her visits a lifeline. She'd bake cookies with me, her hands steady as she guided mine. "You're too quiet, Tommy," she said one Sunday, her eyes searching mine. "Is that Harper boy troubling you?" I froze. William's threats echoing. "Snitches get hurt." I shook my head, but her frown deepened. She started watching William during his visits, noting how I flinched at his touch. "I don't trust him," she told Mom, her voice firm. Mom dismissed it, saying, "They're just kids, Ma." But Grandma's suspicion planted a seed, a faint hope that someone might see the truth. William's cruelty wasn't just physical. He'd mock my fears, my dreams, my everything. "You're weak," he'd say, his voice dripping with scorn. "That's why you need me." I started believing him, my self-worth crumbling. I'd stare in the mirror, hating the scared boy, looking back. Nightmares plagued me. William chasing me through endless woods, his laughter a storm. I'd wake gasping, clutching my blanket, praying for morning. But morning brought school, and school brought William, a cycle I couldn't break. The summer after first grade offered no relief. Millhaven's warmth, fireflies. Lemonade stands, kids splashing in the creek, felt like a cruel contrast to my reality. William's family joined ours for barbecues, his charm fooling everyone but me. He'd pull me aside, his grip bruising, and whisper, "Don't think you can hide." He'd invent new torments, locking me in his garage, dark and musty, until I begged to be let out, or forcing me to eat dirt, claiming it was a dare. Each act chipped away at my soul, leaving me hollow. I started hiding in closets under my bed, anywhere William couldn't find me. But he always did his patience terrifying. "You can't run, Tommy," he'd say, his smile a predator's. I stopped fighting my resistance, worn to nothing. I was his, and he knew it. Yet in the quiet of my room, I clung to a flicker of defiance. I didn't know how or when, but I vowed to break free. That vow, fragile as a spider's web, was all I had. As summer faded and second grade loomed, I braced for another year in William's cage, unaware that the worst was yet to come. Second grade at Millhaven Elementary was a descent into darkness for 7-year-old Tommy Ellis. William Harper's bullying, once a shadow, now consumed my days. His cruelty, a storm I couldn't outrun. Millhaven's charm, its autumn festivals, winter, snow forts, spring blooms, felt like a cruel jest, a world of joy I was barred from. My home, once a haven, was now a fragile shelter, its warmth dimmed by the fear William instilled. I was a prisoner in my own life, and the bars grew thicker with each passing day. William's attacks grew bolder, his confidence unshakable. In class, he'd slip pins under my seat, their sharp points pricking my thighs when I sat. The pain was fleeting, but constant, a reminder of his power. He'd borrow my pencils, snapping them in half, and tossing the pieces back, his grin daring me to complain. Mrs. Carter, our teacher, saw my tears, but not their source, urging me to be brave. William's laughter, low and mocking, followed me everywhere, through the halls, across the playground, into my dreams. He was inescapable, a specter haunting my every step. The playground was his arena. He'd force me into dangerous games, climbing the highest slide, then pushing me down, or swinging me so hard I nearly flew off. Other kids watched their whispers, a chorus of pity and fear. I'd try to blend in, joining a game of tag, but William would appear, his voice cutting through the laughter. "Tommy's mine," he'd say, and the others would scatter, leaving me to face his wrath. Behind the school, he'd choke me with my shirt collar, his hands steady as I gasped, or burn my arm with a twisted cloth, the pain searing. cry Tommy. He'd taunt his eyes alight with glee. I'd bite my lip, refusing to give him the satisfaction. But inside, I was breaking. Our family's bond was my shackle. Mom and Susan Harper planned a joint vacation, their chatter filling our kitchen as William and I were sent to play. At his house, he'd lock me in his closet, the darkness suffocating while he played Nintendo, his laughter seeping through the door. Max, the dog, would whine outside, sensing my fear, but no one else noticed. Jenny, his sister, was a ghost, her music drowning out my world. His parents, Richard and Susan, praised William's soccer trophies, blind to the monster in their midst. At my house, he'd ruin my toys, a model plane, crushed a puzzle, scattered, blaming me when Mom asked. Tommy's so clumsy, he'd say, his smile angelic. My parents believed him, their trust a knife in my heart. Isolation was complete. I had no friends, no allies, but Grandma Ellis, whose visits were too brief to save me. She'd watch William, her eyes sharp, noting how I shrank in his presence. That boy's trouble, she told Mom, her voice firm. Mom laughed, saying, "They're just growing up, Ma." But Grandma's words were a lifeline, a whisper that I wasn't invisible. I clung to them, even as William's torment grew. He'd mock my clothes, my stutter, my everything. "You're nothing without me," he'd say, and I started to believe it. My self-worth, a flicker in the wind. A glimmer of hope came that winter. William's stepdad, Richard, got a promotion that might move them to Chicago. The news hit me like sunlight through clouds. I dreamed of freedom of school, without fear of friends who wouldn't run from me. I'd lie awake, imagining a life where I could laugh again, where my toys stayed whole, where my skin bore no marks. Mom mentioned it casually, saying, "We'll miss the Harpers." But to me, it was salvation. I prayed every night, my hands clasped under the covers, begging for the move to happen. But spring brought despair. The deal fell through, and William returned his smirk, wider, his cruelty sharper. "Thought you'd get rid of me," he taunted, pinching my arm until I gasped. He celebrated his victory with new torments, locking me in a shed during a thunderstorm, the thunder masking my screams, or forcing me to climb a tree, then shaking it until I fell scraping my arms. Each act was a reminder I was his forever. My hope crumbled, leaving only resignation. I stopped praying, stopped dreaming, stopped fighting. William had won, and I was his prize. School became a blur. My grades plummeted. My once eager hand never raised. Mrs. Carter called Mom concerned, but their talks led nowhere. He's just shy. Mom said, her worry growing, but blind to William's role. I stopped eating lunch, my appetite gone, my body thinning. Kids whispered about weird Tommy, their words a mirror of William's lies. I hated them, hated myself, hated the world that let this happen. Nightmares consumed me. William's face looming, his hands choking his voice, promising pain. I'd wake screaming, Mom rushing in, but I couldn't tell her. William's threats were a gag, silencing my truth. Grandma's visits were my only light. She'd read me stories, her voice a balm, but her questions grew pointed. Is William hurting you, Tommy? She asked, her hand on mine. I shook my head, tears welling, but she didn't push. Instead, she hugged me, her strength a promise. You're stronger than you know, she whispered, and I wanted to believe her. But strength felt impossible when William's shadow loomed so large. I was drowning, and no one could see the water. As summer approached, I braced for another season of torment. Millhaven's warmth, kids, biking families, picnicking felt like a cruel contrast to my cold reality. William's presence was a constant, his games a noose, tightening with each day. I hid when I could in closets or under my bed, but he always found me, his patience terrifying. You can't escape, Tommy, he'd say, his smile a predator's. I stopped resisting my spirit, worn to nothing. But deep inside, a spark remained, a vow made in the dark to survive. I didn't know how, but I'd find a way. Second grade was ending, but my war with William was far from over, and the worst battle was yet to come. The spring of 1990, when I was 8, marked the darkest chapter of my childhood in Millhaven. William Harper's reign over me, now 3 years strong, had turned me into a ghost of the boy I'd been. Tommy Ellis, once full of shy smiles, was a hollow shell, my days dictated by fear. Millhaven's charm, its blooming lilacs, kids chasing kites, families grilling in backyards, felt like a cruel mirage, a world I could see but not touch. My home, with Mom's laughter and Dad's car grease, was a fragile refuge, unable to protect me from the boy who owned my life. William's cruelty had reached new heights. At school, he'd prod me with pins during art, leaving tiny red marks that stung for days. He'd trip me in the halls, making it look accidental, his laughter echoing as I hit the floor. Mrs. Carter, our second grade teacher, saw my bruises, but not their cause, urging me to be careful. William's control was absolute, his presence a storm cloud over my world. He'd whisper threats during lunch, his breath hot on my neck. Try anything, Tommy, and you'll regret it. I believed him. My resistance long gone, my spirit a flicker in the wind. Our family's bond was my prison. Mom and Susan Harper, inseparable, planned a weekend getaway, leaving me to sleep over at William's house. The thought filled me with dread, but I had no choice. His house, grand and cold, was a maze of polished floors and high ceilings. Its wealth a stark contrast to my fear. William's room, with its bunk beds and superhero posters, was a stage for his torment. "You take the top," he said that Friday night, his tone deceptively kind. I climbed up, excited despite myself, unaware he chose the bottom bunk because he feared heights. As his parents chatted downstairs, I lay awake. My stomach knotted, sensing a storm brewing in William's silence. Around midnight, I woke to William tugging my arm. "Get up," he whispered, his voice sharp as a blade. Before I could protest, he splashed cold water in my face, a cruel wake-up call. That was pure William. I gasped, blinking against the sting, my heart racing. "We're going to the park," he said, his eyes glinting in the moonlight streaming through the window. I froze. Sneaking out at night was unthinkable, especially at 8. But William's grip on my wrist, his nails digging in, silenced my objection. "Don't make me hurt you," he hissed, and I knew he meant it. I stumbled out of bed, still in my Spider-Man pajamas, my sneakers, the only concession he allowed. We crept through the silent house, Max whining softly as we passed. The back door clicked shut behind us, and the warm May night enveloped us thick with the scent of blooming flowers. Millhaven's streets were empty, the stars bright above, but fear dulled their beauty. William, in jeans and a hoodie, led the way to Millhaven Park, a sprawling green space with a towering jungle gym at its heart. By day, it was a kid's paradise. By night, under a single flickering street lamp, it was a labyrinth of shadows. William had always dismissed the jungle gym as stupid, forbidding me to play on it. But tonight, it was his obsession. We reached the park, the jungle gym, looming like a skeletal beast. William stopped, his silhouette framed by the dim light. "Climb to the top," he ordered, pointing to the highest platform, 12 feet up. His voice was cold, final, a command I couldn't ignore. I hesitated, my heart pounding, but his hand twitched, ready to strike. I nodded. I was agile, used to climbing trees, so the height didn't scare me, even in the dark. I gripped the netting, my sneakers slipping slightly, and scaled upward, my breath ragged but steady. The platform was rough under my hands, the metal cold. I stood at the top, looking down at William. a dark figure below. "Now do a handstand," he said, his tone flat. My stomach dropped. I wasn't a gymnast, and he knew it. "I can't," I whispered, my voice trembling. He shrugged, turning away, and for a fleeting moment, I thought he'd relented. Then, something struck my head hard. Pain exploded, white light flashing behind my eyes. I stumbled, my foot slipping, and the world tilted. I fell 12 feet of nothingness, swallowing me until I slammed into the ground. The impact was a thunderclap, my body breaking against the earth. A sharp crack echoed through me. Bone muscle, something vital, and then a dull, spreading agony. Blood filled my mouth, coppery and warm, trickling down my cheek. I tried to scream, but only wet gasps emerged, my throat choked with pain. My limbs wouldn't move, my vision blurring as I lay in the dirt, the stars above spinning wildly. I was bleeding, broken, helpless, my world reduced to this moment of terror. William's footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. He sat beside me, his face calm, his eyes studying me with a curious detachment. "See this, Tommy?" he said, his voice soft, almost tender. "This is what happens when you don't do what I say." He leaned closer, his breath warm on my face, and I saw it, excitement, not shock, in his gaze. He was thrilled to see me, shattered, his toy finally broken. My heart, already fractured, sank deeper into despair, knowing he'd planned this, wanted this. Pain surged, a white-hot wave, consuming my body, but a faint relief flickered. If I hurt this much, I wasn't paralyzed. Yet I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't escape the boy who'd orchestrated my suffering. William's voice droned on a twisted sermon, blaming me for my fall. "If you'd done the handstand, you wouldn't be here bleeding like this. You need to obey me, Tommy. It's for your own good." He rocked back and forth, his words, a hypnotic chant, his madness laid bare. In that moment, I saw the truth. William wasn't just cruel. He was dangerous, a predator who thrived on my pain. I faded in and out, the world a blur of stars and shadows. William sat there, unhurried, his lecture a perverse lullaby. I thought he'd let me die, hoping my death would erase his crime. My life. Mom's hugs. Dad's laughter. Grandma's cookies flashed before me, a cruel reminder of what I might lose. I clung to consciousness, praying for rescue. But William's presence was a weight pinning me to the earth. The park, once a place of joy, was now my grave, and William was its keeper. The aftermath of the jungle gym fall was a blur of pain and salvation for 8-year-old Tommy Ellis. William Harper's attack had left me broken, my body a wreckage of his cruelty. But survival brought a fragile dawn. Millhaven Hospital became my world, its sterile walls and beeping monitors, a stark contrast to the warm, shadowed park where I'd nearly died. Millhaven County, with its quiet streets and friendly faces, felt distant, as if my trauma had severed me from its rhythm. My family, my home, my parents' love. They were anchors, pulling me back from the edge. But I was forever changed. William had sat by me for 10 agonizing minutes, lecturing me as I bled, his excitement chilling. Fear or guilt finally drove him to run home, waking his parents, who called 911. Paramedics found me their voices, a faint hum over the roar of my pain. "Stay with us, kid," one said, his hands steady as they strapped me to a stretcher. The ambulance's siren wailed, a lifeline threading through the night. I clung to consciousness, my world, a haze of blood and fear, until the hospital's bright lights swallowed me. Doctors swarmed, their faces blurred their words. Urgent skull fracture, broken arm, shattered legs, fractured ribs, cracked vertebrae. I woke days later, my body encased in plaster tubes snaking from my arms. Mom's tearful face beside me. "You're safe." "Tommy," she whispered, her hand trembling in mine. Dad stood behind, his face etched with rage, his gentle giant frame shaking. I told them everything, my voice hoarse, the truth spilling like a dam. William's years of bullying, the pins, the burns, the chokes, the threats, and the rock he'd thrown at my head. I expected doubt, fear they'd dismiss me as sensitive, but they believed me, their trust a balm. The doctors confirmed it. The temple wound was precise, not from a fall consistent with a projectile. Someone did this. Dr. Patel told Mom, his tone grave. Their belief was my salvation, a light piercing the dark. William's family faced swift consequences. Richard and Susan Harper, once untouchable, were humbled, their wealth no shield. They covered my medical bills, a staggering sum that strained even their resources. But it was their shame that weighed heavier. William wasn't jailed too young for juvenile detention, but his parents sent him to a behavioral camp in Colorado, a facility for troubled kids. He's the youngest they've ever taken, Susan said, her voice hollow when she visited Mom. I didn't care. William was gone, his absence a void I didn't know how to fill. His room, once my prison, was stripped of his presence, his trophies gathering dust. Recovery was a new battle. I spent months in the hospital, my body a map of scars and steel pins. Surgeries rebuilt my arm and legs, But the pain lingered, a constant echo of that night. Physical therapy was grueling learning to stand, to walk, each step a triumph and torture. My parents were there, Mom reading me comics, Dad sneaking me candy, their love a lifeline. But I was changed, my shy smile gone, my eyes older than my years. School was a distant memory, replaced by tutors and hospital visits. Classmates sent cards, their crayon scribbles a kind gesture. But I felt like an outsider, my childhood stolen. The psychological toll was deeper. Nightmares plagued me. William's face, the rock's impact, his voice blaming me. I'd wake screaming, Mom rushing in her arms, a safe harbor. A therapist, Dr. Lee, helped me name my fears, but William's shadow loomed large. I questioned everything. Why me? Had I deserved it? Could I trust again? Dr. Lee was patient, guiding me through exercises, stories, tears, but some wounds ran too deep. I feared the world jumping at loud noises or sudden touches, my trust shattered. Grandma's visits were my solace, her stories of her own hard times, grounding me. You're a survivor, Tommy, she said, her eyes fierce. Don't let him win. Millhaven rallied around us. Neighbors brought casseroles. Teachers sent books. The church prayed for my healing. But their kindness felt distant, like sunlight through fog. I couldn't connect my trauma, a wall between me and their world. Mom and Dad struggled their guilt heavy. Mom blamed herself for not seeing Dad, for not protecting. We should have known, Dad said, his voice breaking. I hugged them, reassuring them, but their pain mirrored mine, a shared scar we'd carry. William's family faded from our lives. Susan stopped calling their friendship with Mom, too broken to mend. Richard avoided town, his arrogance replaced by disgrace. Jenny Williams' sister sent me a drawing of Max, a small kindness, but it changed nothing. I heard rumors about William struggling at camp, defiant, but contained, but I pushed them away. He was a ghost, a memory I wanted to bury. Yet his influence lingered, a fear that he'd return his smirk, promising more pain. My life became a rhythm of recovery, hospital therapy home. I relearned my body, my limits, my strength, but I'd never be the boy who climbed trees without fear. The limp, though slight, was permanent, a reminder of battles won. I started third grade, late, a stranger in a wheelchair, kids staring. Some were kind, others cruel, whispering about the kid who fell. I ignored them, focusing on my books, my family, my survival. The legal fallout was quiet, but firm. My parents considered a lawyer, but the Harpers agreed to pay my bills avoiding a trial. It wasn't justice, but it was enough. William's camp was punishment, a cage for the monster he'd become. I didn't want revenge, not then, just to live to breathe without fear. But the park, the jungle gym, the rock, they haunted me, a wound that time couldn't fully close. I was alive, but at what cost? And William, somewhere out there, was a question mark, a threat I couldn't erase. The years after the jungle gym incident were a journey of rebuilding for Tommy Ellis, now 9, and scarred by William Harper's violence. Millhaven's gentle pulse, its seasons changing. Kids, biking, families, gathering. Felt like a distant song I could learn to hear again. My home with Mom's pies and Dad's laughter was my anchor. But I was a different boy, my body and soul marked by that night. I'd survived William, but survival was only the beginning. Freedom was the true battle. Recovery stretched across months, a marathon of pain and perseverance. My body, pieced together with surgeries and steel pins, was a fragile machine. Physical therapy was my daily war, relearning to walk, to run, each step a triumph and agony. At Millhaven Hospital, therapists cheered my progress, but I saw only my limits. I'd never climb trees without fear, never race without pain. Mom and Dad were there. Mom with books, Dad with jokes. Their love a light in the dark. "You're our champ," Dad said, his smile strained but true. I clung to their faith, even when mine faltered. School was a challenge. I returned to Millhaven Elementary, mid-3rd grade, a stranger in a world that had moved on. My wheelchair, then crutches, drew stares. Kids whispered about the kid who fell, their words a mix of awe and cruelty. Some, like Sarah, were kind, sharing crayons. Others mocked, mimicking my steps. I ignored them, burying myself in books, my grades a shield. Teachers aware of my trauma were gentle, but their pity stung. I wanted to be Tommy, not the victim. William was gone, but his shadow lingered, a fear that every bully was him in disguise. Psychological healing was harder. Nightmares haunted me. William's eyes, the rock's impact, his voice blaming me. I'd wake, screaming. Mom, whispering, her arms a haven. Dr. Lee, my therapist, helped me unpack the years of abuse. "You didn't deserve it," she said, her voice steady. We drew pictures, wrote letters. I'd never send, burned them in a safe space. But guilt gnawed. Why hadn't I fight back? Why hadn't I told someone? I questioned my worth, my strength, my right to trust. I feared, flinched, at noises, jumped at touches. Trust broken. I flinched, glanced over my shoulder. Grandma's visits were a solace, her stories, a grounding force. "You're a survivor," she said, fierce, fierce eyes. "Don't let him." Her words sparked, fire grew. Millhaven's embrace was a balm. Neighbors rallied, teachers sent cards, church prayed. Kindness came, but distant trauma, a wall. I watched kids play, felt outsider. Mom, Dad guilt. Mom blamed Dad failed. Mom said, Torre cried. I hugged, saved, but pain shared. We healed, talked nights, bridge silence. William's family vanished. Susan left Richard, hid Jenny, carded empty. William struggled, camp defiant. I pushed away, ghost refused. His letter apology. I burned parents' blessing. Defiance reclaimed. Friends slow cautious saw scars joined, art drawings, healed. Limp, faded reminder battles, won. High school dreams, art, career, family, dated, laughed, loved victories. Decades later, man, father, artist, canvas. Resilience, William footnote. Story, silence. Triumph. If here's he nearly killed, I rose, lived. Scars, badges, love, purpose, joy, free.